The wolf was a creature of myth and frost, a ghost that haunted the edges of the capital, its pelt the color of storm clouds, its eyes chips of amber in the moonlight. A bounty had been placed on its head large enough to buy a duchy, signed by the hands of the Alpha King's own enemies from across the sunken mountains. Every hunter and mercenary worth his salt had tried and failed to claim it. Most returned with missing limbs and stories of a shadow that moved faster than thought. The rest did not return at all. For 364 nights, that same impossible beast had slept outside Jessamine's window. Her room was little more than a closet in the servants' wing of the palace, a sliver of space with a straw mattress and a window that overlooked the frozen royal gardens. It was a place of bone-deep chill and the constant, faint smell of lye soap. Each night, after 16 hours of scrubbing floors and polishing silver and being invisible, Jessamine would press her forehead to the icy glass, and he would be there. He would emerge from the gnarled woods at the edge of the palace grounds, a ripple of gray muscle in the gloom. He would circle the frosted rose bushes once, twice, before settling under the bare branches of the ancient oak that grew just below her window. He would lay his massive head on his paws, those amber eyes fixed on her small square of light, and he would not move until the first hint of dawn. She was not afraid of him. In a life defined by fear, fear of the head housekeeper's temper, fear of dropping a priceless plate, fear of being noticed, and fear of being forgotten, the wolf was a strange, silent certainty, a constant. He was the only thing in her world that saw her. Tonight was the 365th, a full year. She had saved a sliver of bread from her meager dinner, a foolish, sentimental gesture. She slipped the window latch, the cold air slicing into the room like a blade. "Hello, friend," she whispered, her breath a cloud of white. The wolf's head lifted, his ears swiveled toward her voice. He did not growl. He never did. She crumbled the bread and let the pieces fall onto the snow-dusted ground below. He watched them land, but did not move to eat them. His gaze was fixed solely on her. It was a heavy, intelligent stare, filled with a loneliness that vibrated in the pit of her stomach, a feeling she knew as well as her own name. A bell tolled in the distance. The evening's grand banquet was beginning. She had to return, to become a ghost in the halls again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not sure for what. For the stale bread, for her own miserable life, for the bounty on his head. "Be safe." She closed the window, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. The wolf remained, a statue of vigil in the cold, his eyes burning like embers in the gathering dark. He was waiting for her. He was always waiting. The great hall was a cacophony of noise and heat. Laughter, music, the clatter of gold cutlery on porcelain. Jessamine moved through it like a wraith, her gray servant's dress a smudge against the vibrant silks and velvets of the court. Her job was simple: keep the wine goblets full and do not be seen. She was good at it. Years of abuse from the matrons at the orphanage, followed by years of thankless servitude in the palace, had taught her how to fold herself into the background, to make her presence so small it barely registered. At the head of the hall, on a throne of black iron and weirwood, sat the Alpha King, Hadrian. He was as cold and remote as the winter mountains that gave his kingdom its name. Centuries old, they whispered, a heart of ice. He had ruled for 200 years without a mate, without a smile. His face was harsh, beautiful in the way of a glacier, all sharp angles and merciless power. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, missed nothing. They swept the hall with a look of profound, chilling boredom. Jessamine kept her own eyes down, focused on the polished floor. To be noticed by the king was to be judged by him, and his judgment was said to be swift and final. A ripple of cruelty cut through the noise. Lord Valerius, a bloated noble with a spiteful mouth, had cornered one of the younger kitchen maids. The girl, no older than 14, had spilled a drop of wine on his sleeve. Useless creature! Valerius sneered, his voice loud enough to carry. He grabbed the girl's wrist, twisting it. Do you know how much this tunic cost? More than your entire worthless life. The girl whimpered, tears welling in her eyes. The nobles nearby chuckled, turning away. It was sport to them. Servants were less than dogs. Jessamine's feet stopped moving. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Don't look. Keep walking. Do not be seen. The rules of survival screamed in her head. But the girl's soft cry was the sound of every casual cruelty Jessamine had ever endured. The back of a hand for a misspoken word. A day without food for a broken dish. The endless, grinding weight of being nothing. And something inside her, something she had thought long dead, snapped. Before she knew what she was doing, she was moving. She placed herself between the Lord and the girl, her body a thin, trembling shield. Her voice, when it came out, was a reedy whisper, but it cut through the din. Let her go. Lord Valerius blinked, his piggy eyes focusing on her as if she'd just materialized from the stone floor. What did you say, wretch? I said, Jessamine repeated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. Let her go. It was an accident. A hush fell over the nearby tables. People were staring. For the first time in her life, Jessamine was not invisible. She was the center of attention, and it was terrifying. Valerius's face purpled with rage. He shoved the young maid aside and loomed over Jessamine. You dare to address me? You will be flogged for this insolence. Is there a problem, Lord Valerius? The voice was not loud. It was a low, quiet rumble, deep as thunder but soft as snowfall. It sliced through the entire hall, silencing the music, the laughter, everything. Every head turned. King Hadrian had risen from his throne. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace that belied his size. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. He stopped just behind Jessamine, so close she could feel the cold that seemed to radiate from his body. She didn't dare turn. She could only stare at Valerius, whose face had gone from purple to a pasty white. Your Majesty, Valerius stammered, bowing low. This servant was being impertinent. Hadrian's gaze was not on him. It was on the back of Jessamine's head. She felt it like a physical weight, a pressure that made the hairs on her arms stand up. I was addressing my future queen, the king said, his voice still quiet, yet it echoed in the sudden tomb-like silence of the hall. Jessamine's blood ran cold. A mistake. He must have mistaken her for some noble lady standing nearby. She risked a glance over her shoulder. There was no one there. Only the king, his pale gray eyes fixed on her. Not on a lady behind her. On her. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief. Then a titter of laughter, quickly suppressed. The king was joking. It had to be a joke. A cruel royal jest. Hadrian took another step, coming to stand beside her. He looked down at her, and for a fleeting second, his glacial expression wavered. She saw a flicker of something else in those impossible eyes, something that looked like recognition. He extended a hand. His fingers were long, his knuckles scarred, not the hand of a king who sat on a throne, but of a warrior who fought. Come, he said. It was not a request. Her mind was a blank, roaring void. This was not happening. She was a servant, a nobody, less than nothing. But his eyes held her, and she felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of falling. Trembling, her hand barely her own, she placed it in his. His skin was cold, so cold, like touching marble in the dead of winter. But as his fingers closed around hers, a strange, impossible warmth bloomed from the point of contact, a tiny spark against the ice. It shot up her arm, a jolt that made her gasp. He pulled her gently to his side, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of his court. "The banquet is over," he announced. His voice was absolute. "Leave us." Without another word, he turned, drawing her with him, and walked toward the great doors of the hall, leaving behind a court frozen in shock and a lord who looked as if he'd just seen his own ghost. Jessamine could only stumble along, her small, calloused hand lost in his cold, firm grip, her world tilting on its axis. He led her through silent, echoing corridors, away from the warmth and light of the great hall, and into the cold, shadowed heart of the palace. His strides were long, and she had to half-jog to keep up. Her mind was still reeling, a whirlwind of confusion and terror. This was a punishment. It had to be. He was taking her to the dungeons. He would make an example of her for her audacity. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. But they passed the turning for the dungeons. They climbed a grand, winding staircase she had only ever seen from below while polishing its marble steps. They walked down a hall lined with portraits of his ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her with silent accusation. He finally stopped before a set of massive oak doors carved with the royal crest, a snarling wolf's head against a mountain. This was his private study. No one, not even the highest-ranking council members, entered without being summoned. He pushed the doors open and led her inside. The room was vast and dark, dominated by a fireplace where a low fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with thousands of books. A heavy desk stood before the hearth, littered with maps and scrolls. The air smelled of old paper, wood smoke, and something else. Something wild and clean, like pine and winter frost. It was the scent of the wolf. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She stumbled, pulling her hand from his. He turned, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "What is it?" "That smell," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's—" He didn't answer. He simply watched her, his pale eyes seeming to see right through her skin, into the frantic beating of her heart. "Why did you do that?" she asked, finding a shred of her voice. "In the hall. Why did you call me that?" "Because it is what you are," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I'm a servant," she said, the words tasting like ash. "My name is Jessamine. I scrub floors. I am no one." She was pleading with him, trying to make him see the absurdity of it. "I know your name," he said softly. And the way he said it was not the voice of a king. It was something else, something personal. "I know you prefer the window open, even in winter. I know you share your food with the strays at the kitchen door. And I know you have a kindness in you that this place has done its very best to kill." Each word was a stone dropping into the silent well of her soul. How could he know these things, these small, secret pieces of her life? And then she knew. The scent, the intense, knowing gaze, the cold that radiated from him. A cold that was not just a lack of heat, but a living presence. The nights. The 365 nights. Her eyes widened in dawning, horrified understanding. "The wolf," she breathed. "The bounty. That's—" "Yes," Hadrian said. He took a step closer. He seemed impossibly large in the shadowed room, a creature of power and legend made real. "It's me." She backed away until her legs hit the edge of his desk. Her mind couldn't hold the two images together. The cold, remote Alpha King and the wild, lonely creature that had been her only friend. "Why?" The question was a gasp. "Why were you there?" "I was drawn to you," he admitted, and the words seemed to cost him something. He looked away from her, toward the fire. "A year ago, I felt a pull, a flicker of something in a world that has been gray for centuries. I followed it, and it led me to your window." He was talking about the mate bond, She'd heard whispers of it, fables told by the older servants. A bond that could snap into place across a continent, a divine, unbreakable connection. But those were stories, and they happened to powerful, high-born wolves, not to her. That's not possible, she said, shaking her head. I'm human. Or I think I am. I don't have a wolf. Don't you? He asked, his voice gentle. He took another step, closing the distance between them. He raised a hand, not to touch her, but to hover just inches from her cheek. She could feel the chill of his skin without contact. I feel it in you. A seed, buried deep. Something sleeping. Something powerful. She flinched away from the phantom touch. You're wrong. There's nothing powerful about me. You saw me. I serve men like Valerius. I bow my head and I hide. You did not hide tonight, he countered. Tonight you stood up. For a child you did not know, you faced down a nobleman in a hall full of enemies. That is not weakness, Jessamine. He was twisting her world inside out. He saw strength where she only knew fear. He saw a queen where she only knew a servant. This is a mistake, she whispered, her resolve crumbling. You cannot want me. I have nothing. I am nothing. The words were a familiar, painful refrain, the chorus of her entire life. You are not nothing to me, he said, and the intensity in his voice stole the air from her lungs. He finally let his fingers brush against her jawline, and the spark was there again, a searing jolt of warmth against his profound cold. But you are right about one thing. This is a mistake. He dropped his hand as if burned, turning away from her abruptly. He strode to the window, staring out at the frozen gardens below. There is a reason I have ruled alone for 2 centuries, he said, his back to her. My bloodline is cursed, a sickness of the soul. We are cold. We are hollow. Love, the true mate bond. It is a poison to us. It amplifies the cold. It consumes us. It is a death sentence. He paused. My father died in my mother's arms. His body turned to ice. His father, the same. This was the hidden decay. The bounty on his head was a physical threat, but this was a spiritual one, far more insidious. To accept the bond, to love her, would literally kill him. I cannot love you, he stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, a king giving a decree. I will not. This connection, whatever it is, must be severed. I brought you here to tell you this. From this day forward, you are no longer a servant. You will be given chambers in the East Wing. You will be tutored. You will be given the respect of a high-born lady. You will have anything you desire except me. It was a gilded cage. He was offering her the world, but building a wall between them thicker than any stone. You will live your life, and I will live mine, he continued, his voice like chipping ice. We will exist in this palace as strangers. This is the only way. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp. He had shown her a glimpse of being seen, of being valued, only to snatch it away. It was crueler than being invisible. And the wolf? She asked, her voice thick. Will he still come to my window? Hadrian's broad shoulders tensed. For a long moment he was silent. No, he said, the word a shard of glass. The wolf is gone. The separation was a physical ache, a hollow space in her chest. Hadrian was true to his word. She was moved to a suite of rooms larger than the entire servants' wing, filled with soft fabrics and warm fires. Tutors came to teach her history and etiquette. Maids, who days ago were her peers, now bowed and called her my lady. She had everything she could have ever dreamed of, and she had never felt more alone. The wall he had built between them was real and impenetrable. If they passed in the hallways, his gaze would slide right over her, his face a mask of cold indifference. He had made her a ghost again, but this time, a well-dressed one, The nights were the worst. She would stand at her new, larger window, staring out at a different, manicured part of the garden, and the space beneath her window was just empty snow. The wolf was gone. The loneliness was a suffocating blanket. Her only solace came from the palace's forgotten places. She found a small, neglected greenhouse at the far end of the grounds. It was dusty and filled with dying plants. She started spending her days there, her hands in the soil, trying to coax life back into the withered stems. It was work, she understood. It was quiet. No one bothered her there. And a strange thing began to happen. The plants responded to her touch with an unnatural vigor. A rosebush that had been bare sticks for a decade sprouted buds overnight. Wilting herbs straightened, their leaves turning a vibrant green under her fingers. She didn't understand it, but the feeling of life surging through the dirt into her hands was a comfort, a secret power in a powerless existence. Weeks turned into a month. The court buzzed with rumors about her. The king's folly, they called her. The servant girl he had inexplicably elevated. Lord Valerius and his ilk shot her looks of pure venom whenever she was forced to appear at courtly functions. The only person who showed her any kindness was a woman named Genevieve. She was a high-born lady from a neighboring pack, stunningly beautiful, with hair like spun gold and a smile that could charm a snake. She had, the maids whispered, been close to the king years ago. Some said they were to be mated before his coldness took hold. Genevieve sought Jessamine out, offering advice on court politics and fashion. "You must be so overwhelmed," she'd said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "The king can be difficult. He doesn't know how to deal with affection. You must be patient with him." Jessamine, desperate for a friend, clung to her words. She didn't see the calculating glint in Genevieve's eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them. One evening, Genevieve found her in the greenhouse. "My dear, you spend so much time here," she said, wrinkling her nose at a smudge of dirt on Jessamine's cheek. "A lady of your new station shouldn't be grubbing in the dirt." "I like it," Jessamine said simply, trimming a dead leaf from a fern. "It's peaceful." "Perhaps," Genevieve allowed. "But your place is by the king's side. He is just pushing you away to test you. You must be bold. Go to him. Show him you are not so easily discarded." It was foolish advice. It went against everything Hadrian had decreed. But Jessamine was lonely and heartsick, and Genevieve's words were a spark of hope in the darkness. That night, she gathered her courage. She dressed in one of the simple but elegant gowns provided for her and walked to his study. The guards at the door stiffened, barring her way. "The king is not to be disturbed." "Please," she said, her voice small. "I must speak with him." The door swung open from the inside. Hadrian stood there, his face a thundercloud. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. The cold radiating from him seemed more intense than ever. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. His harsh tone stripped the words from her throat. She could only stand there, clutching her hands together, feeling like a fool. "I told you the terms," he bit out. "Are you incapable of understanding a simple command?" A flicker of movement behind him caught her eye. Genevieve. She was in his study, a wine goblet in her hand, a triumphant smirk on her face. She raised the goblet to Jessamine in a silent, mocking toast before melting back into the shadows. The betrayal was a physical shock. Genevieve had sent her here. She had engineered this humiliation. And Hadrian. He was with her. The wall he had built was for Jessamine alone. The pain was so sharp, so sudden, it felt like a knife in her chest. All her hope, all the fragile dreams she had allowed herself to nurture, turned to dust. "I understand perfectly, Your Majesty," she said, her voice suddenly as cold as his. She dipped into a flawless curtsy, a gesture of submission that felt like an act of defiance. "I apologize for the intrusion. It will not happen again." She turned and walked away, her back straight, not allowing the tears to fall until she was back in the suffocating silence of her own rooms. The cage had never felt so small. The next day, a royal decree was posted. Jessamine, the former servant elevated to lady, was to be sent away. For her education and refinement, she was being assigned to a remote northern outpost on the border of the kingdom, a place called Greyfell. It was exile. A quiet, polite, but unmistakable banishment. Genevieve had won. The journey to Greyfell was long and cold. Jessamine traveled with a small, grim-faced escort of guards who spoke to her only when necessary. She was no longer my lady. She was a problem being disposed of. The pretense was over. Greyfell was a rock, a fortress carved into the side of a mountain, overlooking a vast, desolate expanse of pine forest and tundra. It was a place of howling winds and perpetual winter, manned by disgraced soldiers and forgotten men. It was the edge of the world. They gave her a stone cell with a cot and a single arrow-slit window. The commander, a scarred man named Kale, looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. "King's orders are you're to be provided for," he grunted. "But you'll earn your keep. The kitchens always need hands." She was a servant again. The beautiful gowns were gone, replaced by rough wool. The soft bed was a memory. The brief, glittering dream of a different life had ended, leaving her back where she started. No, she was lower than where she started. Before, she had been invisible. Now, she was a pariah, the king's public embarrassment. The bitterness was a poison in her throat. Hadrian had not even had the courage to send her away himself. He had done it with a piece of paper and a wax seal. He had thrown her away like trash. The first few weeks were a blur of misery. The work was hard, the food was scarce, and the cold was relentless. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Resilience. She had survived the orphanage. She had survived the palace. She would survive this. She found her purpose not in the kitchens, but outside the fortress walls. The land was harsh, but it was not dead. She began foraging, using a latent knowledge she didn't know she possessed to find edible roots and hardy mosses to supplement the fortress's meager rations. Her strange affinity for growing things flourished in the wild. She found a sheltered ravine where the wind did not bite so hard and began to cultivate a small, secret garden. She would press her hands into the frozen soil and feel a warmth spread from her, a quiet hum of life. The earth responded. Hardy vegetables grew where they should have been impossible. She was alone, but she was not lonely in the same suffocating way she had been at the palace. Here, in the vast, silent wilderness, she felt a connection to the world itself. The wind in the pines sounded like a greeting. The stones felt solid and real beneath her feet. Her power, her secret self, was growing, untended and wild. Rumors trickled in with the occasional supply caravan. The king was growing more tyrannical. His health was failing, the whispers said. The coldness that had always been a part of him was now consuming him. He rarely appeared in public, leaving the running of the court to his council, which was increasingly influenced by the Lady Genevieve. The bounty on the great wolf had been doubled, then tripled. Its attacks on the kingdom's enemies had grown more savage, more desperate. Jessamine told herself she didn't care. She had carved out a life for herself here, on the edge of the world. She was strong. She was a survivor. She did not need him. But at night, she would lie on her hard cot and trace the patterns of frost on the stone walls, and the ache in her chest would return. She would remember the impossible warmth of his hand, the loneliness in his amber wolf eyes, the way he had said her name. And she would hate him for it. She would hate him for making her feel only to abandon her. One evening, months into her exile, a young soldier, barely a man, was brought in from patrol, his leg mangled by a bear trap. The fort's healer was old and his hands shook. He declared the leg lost. Jessamine, who had been bringing in a basket of herbs, saw the terror in the boy's eyes. She remembered the girl in the great hall. Without thinking, she knelt beside him. "Let me see," she said softly. The healer scoffed. "What can you do, girl? It needs to come off." She ignored him. She placed her hands gently on the boy's shredded leg. She closed her eyes and reached for that quiet hum of life inside her. She pictured the flesh knitting back together, the bone mending, the blood flowing clean. A warmth, stronger than ever before, flooded from her palms. It was not just a feeling. She could see it under her closed eyelids, a soft green light. The boy gasped. The men in the room fell silent. When she pulled her hands away, the wound, while not completely gone, was clean. The bleeding had stopped. The swelling was receding. The mangled flesh was already beginning to mend. She had healed him. Her power was not just for plants. It was life itself. From that day on, she had a new role at Greyfell. She was no longer a kitchen hand. She was the healer. The men, who had once looked at her with scorn, now looked at her with awe and reverence. They called her the Mountain's Grace. She had found her place. She had found her power. And she had done it all without him. The news came on the back of a half-dead horse, ridden by a royal messenger who collapsed in the courtyard. "The king!" The man rasped, his lungs heaving. "The king has fallen." A chill that had nothing to do with the wind swept through Jessamine. Cale, the commander, pulled the man inside, pressing a cup of water to his lips. "What happened?" Cale demanded. "Lady Genevieve," the messenger choked out. "She made her move, accused the king of being a monster, of being the wolf with the bounty, said his sickness was a curse that would destroy the kingdom. The council, they turned on him. There was a fight. He just collapsed. He's dying. She's taken the throne." The world tilted. Genevieve's plan had been long and patient. She hadn't just wanted Hadrian's throne. She wanted to utterly destroy him, to turn his people against him using the very secrets he was trying to hide. The betrayal was absolute, and Hadrian was dying. Cale looked at Jessamine, his scarred face grim. Everyone at Greyfell knew her story. They knew who had sent her there. "He threw you away," Cale said, his voice rough but not unkind. "You owe him nothing." He was right. Hadrian had broken her heart. He had exiled her, humiliated her. He had chosen his curse over her. She should let him die. She should celebrate Genevieve's victory. It would be justice. But the image that rose in her mind was not of the cold, remote king. It was of a great gray wolf with lonely amber eyes, keeping vigil in the snow. It was of the man in the dark study, his voice raw with a pain centuries old as he spoke of his curse. He had pushed her away not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, misguided attempt to save himself. And maybe, just maybe, to save her too. She thought of the life magic humming in her veins, a power that could mend torn flesh and coax life from frozen ground. What was it for, if not this? "Saddle me the fastest horse you have," she said to Cale, her voice clear and steady. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He doesn't deserve you." "Probably not," she agreed, turning to leave. "But I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for the wolf." The ride back to the capital was a frantic, desperate blur. She pushed the horse, and herself, past the point of exhaustion, sleeping only for an hour or two at a time, eating in the saddle. The land itself seemed to aid her. Paths cleared. Streams were shallow where they should have been deep. The wind was at her back. As she drew closer, the land grew sick. The trees were blighted, the fields fallow. The king's life force was tied to the kingdom, and as he died, it was dying with him. She reached the capital in a week, a journey that should have taken 3. The city was grim, patrolled by soldiers wearing Genevieve's crest. The atmosphere was one of fear and oppression. She didn't try to enter the palace through the main gates. She went to the back, to the overgrown and forgotten sections of the garden, to the greenhouse she had once tended. The glass was shattered, the plants inside dead and black. A wave of sorrow and rage washed over her. She slipped into the palace through a servant's entrance she knew from her old life. The halls were quiet, but it was a tense, watchful silence. She moved like a shadow, her old skills at being invisible serving her well. She knew where they would be keeping him, the royal bedchambers. It was the most secure and most symbolic place in the palace. She reached the hallway outside his rooms. 2 guards in Genevieve's colors stood sentinel. But they were not alone. Cowering in a nearby alcove was the young kitchen maid, the one Jessamine had defended in the great hall. Her name was Alara. Alara's eyes went wide when she saw Jessamine. She put a finger to her lips, her face pale with terror. "My lady," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? She'll kill you." "Where is he?" Jessamine asked quietly. "In there," Alara breathed, nodding toward the doors. "He's cold, so cold. The Lady Genevieve lets no one in but her own physician. She says she's tending to him in his final hours." Just then, Genevieve herself swept down the hallway, flanked by more guards. She stopped dead when she saw Jessamine, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of fury. "You," she spat. "I should have had you killed instead of exiled. It seems I have to correct that oversight myself." Her guards drew their swords, advancing on Jessamine. "You won't get to him," Genevieve sneered. "He is mine to watch die. It's what he deserves for choosing a curse over me all those years ago." So that was it. A woman scorned, her rage festering for decades into a monstrous ambition. She was a mirror of what Jessamine could have become if she had let her bitterness consume her. "Get out of my way, Genevieve," Jessamine said, her voice low and dangerous. Genevieve laughed, a high, ugly sound. "Kill her, but first, bring me that one." She pointed a long, manicured finger at Alara, who shrank back into the alcove. A little entertainment before the main event. 2 guards grabbed the terrified girl, dragging her forward. Alara cried out, a sound of pure terror. And that was the sound that broke the world. It was the same sound that had made Jessamine step forward in the great hall. The sound of a helpless innocent about to be broken for sport. The rage that erupted in her was not a hot, burning thing. It was a cold, deep, seismic force, the rage of the earth itself. "No," she said. The word was not a plea. It was a command. She raised a hand. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she had to protect the child. A wave of visible energy, green and gold and pulsing with life, exploded from her. It was not a violent force. It was a pressure, an undeniable presence. The floorboards beneath her feet groaned. Thick, thorny vines erupted from the stone, growing with impossible speed. They snaked around the guards' legs, pulling them to the ground. They formed a living, thorny cage around Genevieve, trapping her. They gently, so gently, wrapped around Alara, pulling her back and away from the danger, shielding her. The entire hallway was filled with a vibrant, humming life. Flowers bloomed on the ancient vines, their scent overwhelming the stale air of the palace. Jessamine stared at her own hand, at the power thrumming through her. It was bigger than she had ever imagined. It was the life force of the world, and it answered to her. She turned her back on the trapped, screaming Genevieve and walked to the doors of Hadrian's chamber. The guards stationed there were frozen, staring in terror at the impossible garden that had sprung up in the hall. They scrambled out of her way. She pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room was freezing. Frost coated the windows, the furniture, the very air. In the center of the vast bed, Hadrian lay still. His skin was pale, tinged with blue. Ice crystals clung to his eyelashes. He was barely breathing. The curse was winning. She rushed to his side, her heart seizing in her chest. She could feel the life draining out of him, a terrible, sucking void. "Hadrian," she whispered, touching his face. His skin was like a block of ice. She thought of the warmth her power could generate, the life it could summon. But how to give it to him? It was a part of her, not something she could hand over. She remembered the spark, the jolt that had passed between them when they first touched. A conduit. She leaned down, her own breath misting in the frigid air. She remembered Genevieve's taunt. "Show him you are not so easily discarded." She remembered the wolf's lonely eyes. With a certainty that came from the deepest part of her soul, she pressed her lips to his. It was like kissing a statue in the dead of winter, cold, lifeless. She poured all of her will, all of her power, all of her desperate, unwilling love into that single point of contact. She commanded the life within her to flow into him, to fight the ice, to burn away the curse. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shudder ran through him, a gasp of air, sharp and pained. The spark ignited, but this time it was not a flicker. It was a wildfire. A torrent of green-gold energy flowed from her into him, a visible river of light in the dark room. The frost on the windows melted, running down the panes in streams. The air warmed. The blue tint of his skin receded, replaced by the pale tone of life. She pulled back, dizzy and drained, the effort costing her more than she could have imagined. Hadrian's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer the pale, icy gray of the king. They were the warm, liquid amber of the wolf. He stared at her, his gaze filled with a dawning wonder. He raised a hand, his fingers no longer cold, and traced the line of her jaw. "Jessamine," he rasped, his voice raw. The world outside the room, the trapped queen, the terrified guards, it all faded away. There was only the circle of warmth around the bed, and his eyes locked on hers. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "You sent me away," she said, the hurt still a tender bruise on her heart. "To save you," he said, his voice thick with a pain that had nothing to do with his curse. "Genevieve was already poisoning the court against you. If you had stayed, she would have found a way to have you executed. Exiling you was the only way to get you out of her reach. It was the hardest thing I have ever done." Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't a rejection, it was a sacrifice. A clumsy, painful, kingly sacrifice. "My curse," he began, his brow furrowing. "The cold. It's gone." He looked at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. "What did you do?" "I think," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I think I warmed you up." He pulled her down onto the bed, wrapping his arms around her, holding her with a desperate strength. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt a shudder rack his entire body. It was not a shudder of cold, but of relief, of release. "I love you," he murmured against her skin, the words he had forbidden himself from ever speaking. "I think I have, from the first moment I saw you through that window. I love you, and it's going to kill me." She pulled back to look at him, her hand on his cheek. "No, it's not," she said, with a certainty that rang with the truth of the earth. "Not anymore." The curse had fed on the cold, on the emptiness inside him. Her power, the power of life itself, had filled that void. She had not just healed him. She had completed him. The aftermath was swift. Kale and his men from Greyfell, loyal to the woman who had saved them, arrived in the capital to find the palace in chaos. They secured the halls, freed the true loyalists, and restored order. Genevieve was brought before the throne. She was no longer a sneering queen, but a broken woman, the thorny vines having released her but left her stripped of her pride. Hadrian looked down at her, his face no longer a mask of ice, but of a weary sadness, Her crime was treason of the highest order. The penalty was death. But as he looked at her, he saw the mirror of his own past loneliness, twisted into something monstrous. He saw the woman he might have been forced to mate, had the curse not held him back. He looked at Jessamine, who stood beside the throne, her hand resting on its arm, a quiet strength radiating from her. He saw the choice she had made, to heal, not to hate. "You will be stripped of your titles and your lands," he declared, his voice ringing with a new authority, one tempered by warmth. "You will be exiled to the Western Isles, where you will live out your days and reflect on the poison of bitterness. That is my judgment." It was an act of mercy that shocked the court more than any execution could have. It was the first act of a new kind of king. Months later, spring had come to the Northlands, a vibrant, lush spring the likes of which no one had seen in centuries. The fields were fertile, the forests were thick with life, and the palace gardens had exploded into a riot of color and fragrance under their new queen's care. Jessamine stood on the balcony of their chambers, the morning sun warm on her face. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "Good morning, my queen," Hadrian murmured, his voice a warm rumble against her ear. "Good morning, my wolf," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up. The bounty on the great wolf had been rescinded, replaced by a new legend, of the queen who had healed the land and her king. She was no longer a servant, no longer an exile, no longer the mountain's grace. She was just Jessamine, and that was more than enough. "I was thinking," Hadrian said, his hand resting gently on her stomach, where the faintest hint of a new life was beginning to stir. "The walls of this palace are cold. Perhaps our child should grow up somewhere with more sun." Jessamine smiled. "I know a place," she said. "A little ravine, sheltered from the wind. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but the garden has potential." He chuckled, a deep, happy sound she had come to cherish. He turned her in his arms, his amber eyes full of a love so profound it still sometimes stole her breath. "As long as I'm with you," he said, his voice soft, "anywhere is home." He kissed her then, a slow, gentle kiss full of promises kept and a future just beginning. The cold was a distant memory, a ghost of a story. There was only warmth now, an endless, vibrant, life-giving warmth. They had saved each other. The wolf had found his mate, and the servant girl had found her throne, not of iron, but of love. And in the heart of the Winter Kingdom, an impossible spring had finally, truly begun.